I said, wow. So debunking the $1 trillion myth, black spending is not black wealth. Whoa. The assertion that if African Americans would only pool its perceived $2.1 trillion consumer spending power, that as a group, they would be one of the top 10 wealthiest nations in the world is a myth that ignores the fact that wealth is measured by assets, not by spending, according to a professor who has written extensively on the subject. Again, the link is already in the show description. You can read this more carefully at your leisure if you like. According to the Federal Reserve's 2022 survey of consumer finances, the median white household wealth is $285,000, yet the median household wealth for black families is only $44,900. High spending with low wealth building assets, homes, businesses, manufacturing, etc., actually points to economic vulnerability. The origin of the myth of buying power, that is often traced back to corporate marketing reports released by Nielsen and others that sought to highlight black consumers as lucrative untapped market, not that African Americans were extremely wealthy. I just want to highlight again that it's specifically usually the Selig Center, and then Nielsen references the Selig Center, and then McKinsey has jumped in there, but the point is that just to add, not that this isn't even criticism, but just to add a little bit on here, that rarely does anyone ask about the origin and how it reduces to Nielsen and then Selig. And as it says here, quoting from the report that we talk about all the time, Black Americans' buying power has grown to 2.1 trillion. But the point being that for advertisers looking to reach this powerful consumer segment, understanding who they are, what motivates them, how they consume media, and what pushes them to purchase is key to creating authentic connections. So again, Nielsen and them are in this to connect advertisers with a buyer, not to teach black people why or how or what is the relationship to the economy. In an extensive Crusader interview, and that's what I'm saying. Dr. Jared Ball, professor of media and Africana studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore and author of The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power, Media, Race, and Economics, debunked and explained the myth's origins, its impact on black families, and offered solutions on how black Americans can create wealth. Now that's interesting. Now, I don't know if I would have phrased it that way, but I like that I'm considered to have offered some solutions. So as I've said, it's just, I'm quoted here as saying, it's talk about all the time, it's advertising, try to point out the fallacy around financial literacy. I'm very happy she includes that in there because this is the most my quotes have actually appeared in the story where we've actually had these wonderful conversations. So I'm very well quoted. And for the most part, I think everything is right on or close enough. She covers this whole point about GDP, adding some information about where others are in terms of their GDP. And I'm very glad that she brings it up here. And again, as we'll see at the end, and then notes that spending power is about consumption. It is not about a measurement of actual wealth or income or political power or anything. So again, I'm very well quoted throughout. This is great. I appreciate it. She includes my answers around propaganda and the ideological incentive to defend the narrative. I mean, this was. I will say that 100% of the public I was talking about the criticism I've gotten that has come from people who have not read the book. Ball said, noting that everyone from hip hop artists, Willie D, to Black Wall Street advocates, Killer Mike, to Black entrepreneurs, Boyce Watkins, and social media influencers attacked him. Usually they respond anyway. So I'm glad I appreciated she put that in there. I really like this point here too, because she did something that we talked about that she was already onto, that I was already onto separate. Like we're already, the point that I've talked about before, that E. Franklin Frazier got a lot of the same criticism from the black bourgeoisie and defenders of black capitalism that I got. I'm not equating my work again to his. I am simply saying that because we make similar arguments and that my argument is a sort of child of his argument, that we get a lot of the same kind of responses. Frazier argued that the black bourgeoisie had become trapped in a world of make-believe, status consumerism, and imitation of white values rather than working towards substantive racial uplift. While chasing the so-called American dream, African-American thought leaders,
the Court's top thought leader,
had inadvertently failed to bring the masses of black people who remain trapped in low-wage jobs or poverty toward the ladder of success. We both point out that the black press, among other institutions, played a role in producing these mythologies, mimicking a white society. The black press pandered to the black bourgeoisie's fantasies about economic strength. My goodness, is that still is that still an issue? Downplaying the harsh realities of racism, crime, violence, economic exploitation, and have contributed to the world of make believe. Fraser talked about how his book was denounced in the pages of the black press and bookstores refused to carry it. That his book created a shock of self-revelation and intense anger, where he was accused of defaming the Negro and being a traitor. He was at least never called a raccoon as I was. I don't know if he was ever called in public a raccoon like I was. But the point being that it's the black bourgeoisie's defense. And I'm glad Stephanie brings in economic data showing where people actually are, talks about the mythology of the circulating dollar. To me, this is huge for a black press outlet in particular. There's no data to substantiate this oversimplified claim. There has been no government or data or census or Federal Reserve data that tracked how long a dollar stays in different racial communities. Black consumers are more likely to spend outside their community because of fewer black-owned retailers, service providers, banks, and other services. But there's no circulation dollar. That's all mythology nonsense. She talks about the value of a reparations project targeting land, as I understand, talks about she talks at least about how the reparations project talks about it, the lost land and wealth associated with that lost land suffered by black people in this country, which is more accurate than telling them, as I point out in my work, that black people should buy land instead of rims and we'd be rich. And I love how we come back to this point. As the world celebrated the election of Barack Obama as the 44th U.S. president and the first of African heritage in 2008, Black Americans were experiencing the greatest transfer of wealth and financial loss during the subprime mortgage crisis. Between 2007 and 2010 alone, Black Americans lost over half of their wealth, a collapse engineered by predatory lending and systemic racism. And yet, according to the U.S. Treasury Department, TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program, injected $700 billion into the economy, with $182 going to AIG for insurance, $45 going to Citigroup, $45 going to Bank of America, $25 to J.P. Morgan, of who... and $25 to Wells Fargo. But only 1 million people received permanent modifications, while a majority denied relief or their housing or their mortgages were re-foreclosed. She does point to this argument made by Brookings and other more conservative outlets that if we would stop the racism, it creates wealth for everybody. Now, this is I don't know. I'm glad I'm not being quoted here, because I don't think I would have said it quite this way. But when she says here that, according to me, that my solutions include acquiring assets, creating and owning manufacturing and distribution companies, and re-examining the meaning of political power. I don't think that that's what I would have. This might be the only part of this article I would have some, it's so good otherwise. I'm not gonna make a fuss about it, obviously, but I don't think I would have said it quite this way. I liked it. What I love, though, is that she I have never seen this happen, where any of my discussions of of independent voting or different approaches to economics, she includes my points about redistributing wealth. Like, I don't remember the black press ever including this. The commercial black press. I'm not talking about black outlets. She talks about the Diedrich Muhammad point that I reference all the time about the amount of black businesses being created not having anything to do with creating wealth. And then she more or less gets me right here. And she concludes this article by saying quoting me and saying we must politically organize and go after the $27 trillion in GDP. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.